Ashley, welcome to Money Bites.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. If you don't mind sharing a one-liner about yourself, a surprising trivia about yourself that people don't know about.
A one-liner is I'm a wife, mom of 3 daughters who loves math, has enjoyed her career, and likes to have a lot of fun. My fun fact, I've been to a Disney theme park over, I think, 400 days so far of my life. And last year we went 73 times.
Instead of, why don't we go get pizza? Why don't we go to Disney?
I would say it's cultural. My parents were like big Disney fans, and so that's how we spent our summers. And now bringing my own kids is a lot more fun.
Oh, that's
But I do
awesome.
get that reaction, even from the avatar. I can tell your reaction. I get that reaction.
I do have to ask one more question. You said likes math. Is that you liking math or your 3 daughters liking math?
Oh, that's me. I'm obsessed. Luckily, I think it's passed down to them as well. I was doing algebra problems with my daughter yesterday, and that's what I consider fun.
Wow. Okay.
Also an eye raiser. Like also, yeah, that reaction is also normal.
Well, kind of related to that, our third resident question. What's your first memory of money?
Oh, good question. I remember for my birthday, my parents got me a cash box with my name on it. As a good Chinese American, I was told to like save my tooth fairy money or any money I got for Chinese New Year or Christmas. I think I got it in the first grade, so I was like 6 or 7.
Did you continue being a avid saver?
Yes, although as I've gotten older, I think there's something to be said about enjoying experiences, i.e. Disney. The average saver probably wouldn't pay a annual pass. There is some saving component to that too, but I think there's also something to be said about just enjoying the experiences, probably because my parents and my grandparents weren't able to enjoy those experiences. So how can we do that now, but also save at the same time?
Have your parents and grandparents come around and are able to enjoy the experiences a bit more now?
I think that I didn't realize this was going to be an interview about Disney, but I think like growing up, going to Disney and like, right, that experience was something that my parents instilled in me, the value of experiencing things with your family, that you can't always put a price tag on it.
It seems that that actually started with college as you were hustling. Your grandparents played a big role.
Yeah, I think because my parents, both in their families, sent themselves to school and went to really good schools and worked really hard, and understanding their story and how they wanted to live a different life and have a different life for their family. That is something that just played a really big role in where I went to college, even what kind of job I had. My parents actually were not the, I would say, quote unquote, typical Asian parents that said you had to be a doctor, lawyer. I mean, they definitely tried to influence, but they let me and my siblings kind of pursue whatever career we wanted. But it still does play a part of how can we provide for our family and care for our family, because my parents and grandparents worked so hard for us to be in America and to do well and to provide for me. I think that really resonated with who I am and how I want to live my life and provide for my family.
And as you were sort of working towards that goal, you went to college. And I found it really interesting how after you graduated, you were hustling while living in your grandma's basement.
So my grandmother had an apartment in New York, Chinatown on Mott Street, and I got a full-time job working at Time Warner. And so I'm pretty sure it was my parents that said, you should live with your grandmother. Again, avid saver. You don't have to pay rent. I lived with her for the past couple of summers when I interned in New York, and it was tough. It was like a old tenement apartment building, 1 bedroom, probably 400 square feet. The bathroom was just a toilet. There was no shower. I actually got a gym membership to actually take a shower. But also, as a 22-year-old, I got to work and have fun and meet my friends and have a really great experience. And my grandma would get me like a bao, which is a Chinese bun, every morning, make me lunch, and sometimes we'd have dinner together. I do feel really lucky because I lived with my grandma for about 2 years before she passed away. And I grew up with my grandma. She actually came to our house and helped raise us. So, from a financial standpoint, it was a quote unquote good idea because I was able to buy my first place then soon after. But I do think I'm really thankful too because I was able to have that experience with her as well.
Can you speak a bit more about buying your place by saving 2+ years? Wow, that's super impressive.
Yeah, so I rented in New York for about a year afterward, and then I moved to this wonderful place called New Jersey for love for my fiance at the time, who's now my husband. Because I was a finance major, I saw the pros of buying a home and not paying for rent, and I think especially not paying for rent for 2 years, there was something that felt good about investing in myself. I was able to pay off my college loans the first year that I was out of school. And then the second year basically was to help pay the down payment on my first condo.
I love how you, out of the frugality and also the fact that you were able to spend quality time with your grandma, you didn't let that opportunity go to waste. And wow, a real estate homeowner at early 20, mid 20s. That's amazing.
I mean, there are times that it's really, really hard. There was no Wi Fi, there was no air conditioning, no shower, cockroaches all over the place. But like looking back, I think it was a really, really good experience. I actually always have it on my phone so that when my kids, if they ever complain, I can like show them what it was like for me and for their grandpa for how to live. It was hard, but at the same time, too, I think I was more willing to do it. I was young, could sleep on a couch and live out of a suitcase. I also think it provided me a little bit more grit and just being able to hustle. Again, not just for money, but it was also the experience. If I had to travel back to my parents' house, it would be almost 2 hours each way. And so the experiences that I got to have having boba with my friends and going downstairs, those are the kind of experiences that I really enjoyed. I probably do miss a lot about New York.
New York is pretty awesome. Your time at time, sort of meeting celebrities when they popped in, etc., was pretty awesome. And then you left for a new position in a completely different industry. How did that transition come about?
So I actually interned in London in college at Citigroup Asset Management, and it was a really, really interesting experience. But I also interned at Time Warner in magazines, and I just thought that fit my personality and the type of company culture a lot better. But maybe a year or two after I started working at Time Warner, I realized that .com it was blowing up, and so because I was on the financial side, I just saw ad sales just plummeting. And being a good finance person, I wanted some stability with my job and what I was doing, even if I wanted to become like a finance director in style, even though that was the dream. And so I was like, okay, let's go back to what I know. And so, I had a connection with someone at Citigroup in real estate finance. Luckily, I had a connection. I'm very, very big on your network and leveraging who you know. I think I was really, really lucky that I had people that helped me make those connections. I think not everybody has that in their back pocket. I think I was really lucky because this was probably 2006. I worked remotely for 3 days a week, which I think is somewhat unheard of back then.
Especially in the financial sector.
Mm-hmm. And I just felt it was a really, really interesting experience. I got to learn more about real estate in the Northeast. I realized that the culture just wasn't for me. I liked being at a company where, yeah, there are celebrities that are walking around and they have really fun events and company culture and the type of people. I liked working with other people that were my age and my life stage, though Citigroup wasn't necessarily for me. I think it was a really, really great experience to have that and to know what kind of company culture you'd want.
I really love that. I think it's also very insightful that sometimes when you're working, you get so bogged down in the work, you don't have the opportunity to pick your head up and just look around. And I think being aware of industry trends on a macro level is still super important. That was actually really insightful of you to sort of realize the magazine space might be suffering in the coming years. You realize corporate culture in the financial sector was not a good fit, which also I think is another huge plus on your skill set, knowing what you don't want as you progress in your career.
I wish I was this articulate and I actually knew these things at 26. Like, hindsight is so much better. Like, now I can look back at this 20 years later and be like, yes, that is the reason. I don't know if I could have articulated. So thank you for giving me the credit, but I don't think that I knew all of that at that time.
Where was your next move?
I went to a small ad agency where I was able to like really build up my Excel skills. But then when I especially moved to New Jersey, I didn't want to do that commute anymore. And so I actually found a job in FP&A at Unilever, which sells everything from Q-tips to Dove to Ben& Jerry's ice cream. I spent about almost 5 years at Unilever, just getting a really great experience working on product, but also just learning at this really, really big, amazing company. I think the company, it just has done so well and marketed itself so well. But I also think just working with the caliber of people and the type of company and training that they do was just, I feel like, my second college experience. I didn't go to grad school, but I feel like that working at Unilever kind of was like my quote unquote grad school experience because of all the people I worked with and the experience I had there.
What's FPNL?
FP&A is financial planning and analysis. So whether it was at Time Warner, at Unilever, we would take all the different brands and all of their finances and consolidate it into one big one. So because we were managing Unilever US or North America, we would send that to London where the global team would consolidate all the different regions of the world.
What was sort of a typical day like, or what was most of your work scope?
Probably what people would expect, but a lot of Excel spreadsheets, a lot of validating numbers and making sure we had the right things, pulling numbers in a system and tying it out, seeing why things are, doing better or worse and being able to explain why Magnum ice cream was doing really well or why Hellman's mayonnaise just didn't do as well at that time. It's everything from like doing something in a system to like printing out papers and like comparing numbers and making sure that it all matches. Even at that time, we were printing out one of our CFOs at the time. We had to like give him an actual binder. And so printing out the sheets and putting it in a binder, that was just one of the things that we did. I feel like I'm aging myself now, but
I didn't want to say, but
no, absolutely. You're allowed to. I'm aging myself, but I think like that also gives me perspective now too. Just the kind of technology and tools and capabilities that we now have to do these things. When you were asking about a typical day, like that's a day that stands out in my mind. I think we had to come in on a Saturday morning and like collate pages in a binder, which I didn't think I would do after I graduated college. But hey, I got much better. I probably am still not great at it, but I got much better.
So it sounds it's not just numbers though. You had to sort of provide a business context and rationale for what the numbers were saying. You mentioned this was one of your best jobs that you've ever had. Why was that?
I've met really, really good friends. 15 years later, we're all trying to keep in touch, which I think is pretty impressive. I just worked with, I think, some of the smartest people. And not that they were just smart and had really good degrees, but they were just really good people that, again, I think company culture is just like a really, really big thing. And even if it's might be weird about like, how do you get more people to eat more tomato sauce or get them to eat more ice cream? You worked on these interesting projects with cool people. This is a personal thing, but I love food. And so I was just really interested. And there's so much psychology behind it. So when you go to a supermarket, like the things at your eye level, companies actually have to pay more money or called slotting fees so that it's at your eye level because you're more likely to buy that product. Again, I think first is the people, but I think working in the type of culture and working on a product you enjoy, which I really enjoy food. So I think that was a big reason for me.
That's actually kind of scary in terms of how much psychology is infused in marketing. Super creative and super cross-functional.
Yes, like I'm a finance person, so I lack a lot of creative, but I think that's what was cool was when I worked on the Lipton tea brand, like I would actually be in meetings where we talked about like the color and the type of product and like what you like about it and what you don't. Even though I was finance and I could do the numbers, there was something to be said about like getting firsthand contact and input into those decisions.
Mm. Well, you were having the best time of your life at the best job that you've ever had. And then kids come into the picture and you've had to do a bit of a trade-off analysis. What was going through your head then?
I distinctly remember I had my first daughter, and I think I was on maternity leave for almost 6 months. Shout out to Unilever for that too. When I came back from maternity leave, I got promoted to a new role, which was grocery finance manager for all grocery stores in the US, minus Target. So it was a really, really big job. I think there were like 400 business partners at the time, and I had 3 people working for me. And I distinctly remember having a newborn, not getting much sleep, breastfeeding, just absolutely exhausted, new parent. And I got a phone call, I think at like 5 in the morning from one of my business partners. It woke up my sleeping daughter, my sleeping husband, and myself. And I distinctly remember at that time, I said, like, I can't do this. Like, I can't have a job that will impact all of us in a negative way at that time. I think it was just a season in life. If I were able to like do that job again, I would do it in a heartbeat. It was a really, really cool, interesting job. And there was an opportunity with someone that I worked with at a small startup called Siggy's Yogurt.
Yeah.
And it was really, really exciting. One, to work with someone that I knew and trusted. She also was a working mom and that understood like what kind of work-life balance I was looking for. And I think the excitement of working at a small startup. I think at the time I was employee number 10 or 12 at that time. I am really thankful I did it. I had a really, really great boss. Shout out to Jung. After working at some really, really big, well-established companies, it's really interesting to learn something on the other side. So I did everything from like IT, which meant calling Time Warner Cable every time it rained, opening up the mail and like trying to pay checks, but we didn't have enough money at the time. So like, how do I manage the cash flow so that we had enough money in the bank at all times, sorting through our swag that we had and like arranging yogurts or even like cleaning up dishes in the sink. I've gone to like a lot bigger companies then after I left. And I think it makes you appreciate having someone in IT help you with your problems or like taking your problem and sending it off to somebody else. But I think it's also really interesting to like have a part and a say. Two, I think it taught me something about being a working mom. There are a lot of conversations on like, how do you have it all? For me, I had to prioritize my family, which it makes a really big deal if I can drive my kids to their activities and make it to all their school events or volunteer at school. These are now just bigger priorities on my list that weren't on my list before. So like you were talking about trade-offs, I make a lot of different trade-offs in my career that I probably wouldn't have made in my 20s, but I think that's just part of the fun part of going on this adventure.
As your family grew, did the sort of sharing of responsibilities with your husband also grew? And did that sort of impact your career decisions?
Yes, like any job decision I make, I have a lot of conversations with my husband because he is a partner in our family and my marriage and in my career too. And I would say it goes both ways. We moved across the country for my husband's job. And so we made that decision, even though I didn't have a job, we decided to make that, decision for our family. And so it just goes both ways on that part. I would say too, now having 3 kids instead of one, like I laugh because in that moment I was like, oh my gosh, 1 kid is so much. Now I'm like, oh man, I only had one kid. I should have enjoyed it more. I think it's also a stage of life when they're a newborn, it's just a lot harder. My husband and I do try to share a lot of the workload. I laugh because we talked about like who's going to pick up which kid today, right before this call. The bigger part of like how big of a job can we invest in? Unfortunately, I've had to decline jobs that just like weren't the right fit for our family, even if that would have been better for my career. I think again, family might edge out taste testing food, but I think that's just so important to me that that is what I prioritize. I do think though, I've been really lucky that I can prioritize family. I can be there for all their events, but I've had a pretty interesting career. At least I think I have, where I like what I do. I like the people I work with, and I get to do cool, interesting things. And so partially because I've been lucky, partially because I've worked hard, but I would give a lot of credit, especially to my husband, my parents, the whole, you need a village to raise a family. I think that that's part of it. All the moms or dads that I carpool with, it literally is a village of people that's why I'm able to have the career that I've had so far.
You did mention, though, there were some missed opportunities where families did have to take priority. Is the biggest hurdle the expected time commitment?
I wouldn't even say necessarily time commitment. For all my working parents that are out there, it's not even the amount of hours because I think a lot of working parents, at least that I've worked with, 7:30 to 10 o'clock was like a really, really great time to catch up. I think there was a pro of sleeping kids, so I had to stay home anyway. But then also everyone at work, they didn't bother you because they weren't working as well. And so you could get a lot done in a short period of time. It's less so about the number of hours. I think it's about what times you can be available that are typical hours. I would say before I had kids, I was always wondering where parents were going. I was like, what do they have to do? Like, aren't they in school? Like, I just didn't understand. I apologize to all parents out there. Two, I think a big thing is like if a job requires a lot of travel, and some parents do it, and it can be really hard. It's a question that you have to talk about with your family and how you make that work. Lastly, it's just, I think a big thing, at least for me as a working parent, it's just the flexibility. It doesn't necessarily mean that I won't work hard or I won't be engaged, but the times that I'm there, I will be very efficient and effective and working. But if there are times that I need to go to a school concert, like I am going to prioritize it, I'll move my meetings, but I will still get the work done. So I think there's a lot of different things that just make it harder. Time goes on and you get better at certain things. Like a parent once told me, like outsource things that you can because, you have financial flexibility to do that. Like sometimes that's an option. And two, like I'm an overachiever. I used to want to get A+ on everything. I've realized being a full-time working mom, sometimes I'm going to get a B+ on both, and that's okay.
It seems like finding a balance and trade-off is a continued theme that we're visiting. I also want to go into a comment that you made that you've had a really fun career. That was the adjective that you used. Do you think that's because of your role working in finance? What's made your career so fun and eclectic and creative?
I think it's funny you say that because I would say most of my business partners that work with finance, fun is probably the least likely adjective that anyone would use. Again, I love math. Like my necklace here is A to the fifth power because like that represents me and my family. All my friends laugh at me because, right? Like, why would you have math in a necklace? But like, I just think it's super fun. If people don't like it, that means it's even more fun for me because then I get to explain and help people do that. I think that's a quote unquote fun part of my job. But a lot of the things I like Disney, math, Excel, are not things that everybody will like, and that's okay. We all have very different things that we love. But what made it fun, again, looking back at like all the companies I've worked with, it really, I know I sound like something people have heard before, but it really is about company culture. Company culture brings the type of people that are like you, that are interested in food testing so that you're not the only wackadoo that like wants to go to a grocery store and look at those kind of things. I think a part of that company culture are the type of people you've worked with. As my career has progressed, the people, type of people that you work with. I'm really, really big on when I interview, like I'm interviewing them back.
Mm.
Do they want a math loving nerd that's going to talk to them about shopping? If like that's just not who they want, I think then maybe that's not the culture for me. I think I'm also just the type that like I've always been like this, so I'm going to try to bring fun wherever I go. You're actually at work longer than you are sometimes when you're at home. And
Mm.
so if you're going to be there, yes, there's work to be done and that's what you're getting paid for. But I also think there's something about having fun at the same time. And so to summarize or TLDR, the people, the culture, what you do, and then also you bringing yourself to it can be a lot of fun.
I do think that it's very important. There's a saying at Meta that says, bring your authentic self to work. I don't think it's feasible in all companies, but if there's a corporate culture that supports it, I think it can really make a difference. But you mentioned a really important part about sussing for it during your interview process. It's super hard to suss out a corporate culture fit during an interview process, though. Any tips there?
Sure. I think one, there's a lot more information online. It's a pro and a con. Pro is you can like research it. Con, for every person that says they love it, someone else might say they absolutely hated it. And so, how can you find out from your network with someone that is like you? I remember someone asking me about a job that I liked and the reasons why I liked it.
Mm.
They were the complete opposite of me. And so, they were my friend. But I was like, no, I actually think you would hate it. Like, I loved it, but it's just not the type of culture for you. Having those conversations and knowing the people that have worked there, I think just helps a lot. So, how can you work in your network? Because, right, when you're interviewing, you're worried about getting the job. You might not be willing to ask, like, no, what is it really like? And so, how do you find people in your network? And this is probably more bold of me, and it's probably evolved over time as I've gone through my career. I do try to ask these in my interview questions. I think there's nice ways to ask these things. You don't just say, like, what's your company culture like? Because most of the time they're trying to sell you too, right? And so you have to like read through the sales pitch, asking those more specific questions about what does work like after work is done? Or what are the top 3 ways that you would describe your company culture? Or what do you think are the ways that your company culture could be better? Another technique I've used after you get the job, asked to meet with someone that you interviewed with prior. At this point, you know that they want you for the job. And then you can ask them the real question because usually they only leave like a certain percentage at the end of the call, right? You can have dedicated time for your questions about what that looks like. It takes time, it takes investment, but if I'm going to make a career change or company change, I think it's really important I want to make sure it's the right place. And so this is one thing I did when I worked at Microsoft. So I interviewed with the hiring manager and the director, but then I also interviewed with the 5 people that work for this manager to ask, what is this manager like? What are, their pet peeves? What are they good at? So they were very like informal one-on-ones. I've been on the hiring manager side and I've always offered after you get the job, if you want to know more, let me know. I'd rather me tell you the truth and know what it's really like. And then at least when you come in, your eyes wide open, then you come in here and be in shock. So, like, what are the things that I can do to help you understand our culture? I would say people rarely have taken me up on it. They probably just think I'm a nut. But I do think asking those questions help, as you said, like suss that out in a different way because you're getting honest, feedback.
Would you say that even at that point, you've gotten an offer, you've done additional interviews? If there are red flags, it's still okay to decline the offer at that point?
This is my opinion, but I think so. If it's a big enough red flag, you've received the offer. So it's still your choice, right? Like, even if you receive the offer, you can say yes or no. You don't need to explain why, right? If it's a big red flag and it's just not going to work, then at least you know that for yourself and you're saving yourself the heartache. But also, it takes so much time to interview, to onboard, to train. It's very, very expensive. That for the company's sake too, and the hiring manager, it's better if you know that's just not going to work. On the flip side, I've seen red flags when I've interviewed and like sussed out what the culture is like. Now, one, I think that happens at any company. Like, I don't think any company is perfect, but at least I know what those red flags look like before I go in. 2, I know that I'm making a decision on what I'm going to prioritize. If they're going to give me the flexibility to be remote, if there's a red flag of something I don't love, okay, like, am I willing to give that up? If it's a red flag and it's just going to bother you every day, my personal advice would be you probably shouldn't take that job. But if it's something that you can kind of deal with because all the rest of your checklist is checked off and those are your priorities, how do you mitigate that as best as possible?
I love that advice. Given Winnie is a platform and community of women in tech improving financial literacy, I have to ask this as one of our last questions. Are you set for life after Siggy's being the 10th employee? And would love to also hear like your experience at some really well-known, interesting startups, as well as big tech. You've been at Microsoft, you've been at Meta, etc. What the difference and what your preferences?
To answer your first question, am I financially set for life? No, because I was not there for very long. But on the flip side, I think it's one of the best career experiences I've ever had. It's made me so, so appreciative, like that you just like send off an email and it gets fixed in the background. You just have an appreciation on like, oh, wow, like I didn't realize how much HR stuff people actually had to do. From that side, I would say I'm forever grateful because I think that kind of experience was able to help me leverage in my job, able to help me pivot and like know how right a CEO is thinking because I work right next to him. Indirectly, because of that experience, I'm working at a small company. My job life satisfaction is probably really, really high. All the additional income I've made after that is because of all the prior experiences that I've had. And so indirectly, I think it definitely has. Your second question, startup versus big tech. I think there were a lot of things that you learn at a startup that you just have to pivot fast, understand what's going on in the market, be willing to make change that I think Meta and a startup had in common. Just Meta had a lot more money. And so I didn't have to worry about a check getting paid to a vendor. But I think a lot of the concepts were the same. And then if I look at another company like Microsoft or even Nordstrom and these really, really big companies versus a startup, if a company has been around for a long time, there are a lot of times that someone, that's been in the company, let's say for 20 years, will say, well, we've tried that. It just doesn't work. There is something to be said about history and like not making the same mistakes, right? But I think there is also like working at a startup just opens your mind up to let's just try it. Worst comes to worst, it doesn't work. I think big companies can always learn from startups and startups can always learn from big companies to have process and procedures so that you're not doing the same things multiple times. That's why I love the startup experience so much is like I can bring that to my job while also knowing that process, not doing the same thing over and over again. How do you marry the two and like kind of be in the space in between? That's why I feel like it's so fascinating.
For your next role, would you say startup or big tech?
Or maybe something in between. It's a big question. I think luckily I've liked both and I've had a really good experience with both. I would say anything's fair game. I think more so it's about the right fit. Again, for my family, that's a huge one, but also something that I enjoy. I've been really, really, really lucky to work on brands that I'm obsessed about. So whether it's Microsoft Excel, Klondike ice cream, or Jimmy Choo shoes, like I could talk to you all day and all night about them. For me, a brand of what I work on is just something that's really important to me. So in company culture, like those are the two things that lead me more than like size or the type of company or type of industry.
Maybe if this podcast blows up and somebody from Disney watches, they should come calling to you.
There is something to be said. Someone told me like, well, you love it so much. You don't always want to know what's happening behind the scenes. And you just want to be the consumer. And so I was like, oh, that's fair. Like you don't always want to be thinking business but Disney, if you're watching, Bob Iger, yeah, I'm, available. I would definitely consider that in my future.
Love it. Ashley, this was lovely. Thank you so much for coming.
This was super fun. Thank you for making it like enjoyable. We'll talk soon.
Bye.